So nutrients, let's actually break down these different categories of stuff. The first one we're going to talk about is carbohydrates. These are kind of the bad guy right now when we talk about nutrition. And as with so many other things, I'm just going to let you know the answer is more complicated. So why are they called carbohydrates first? They're made of carbon and water. The essential formulation for all carbohydrates is we've got one carbon for every water. Hydrate meaning water. And so whether you've got 3 carbons or 5 carbons or 6 carbons or 54 carbons, there's going to be an equal number of water equivalents, or twice as many hydrogens and the same number of oxygens. A lot of the carbohydrates that are biologically interesting are what are called hexose sugars. So C6, hex meaning 6 carbons, H12, twice as many, O6. The thing is, these have lots of different forms. One chemical formula, C6H12O6, these atoms can be hooked together in many different ways to form subtly different molecules. On the left we've got glucose, and on the right we've got fructose. They have the same chemical formula, they have the same makeup, but they behave differently in your body, and they actually taste a bit different. Fructose is a little bit sweeter. So what are their functions? Their number one function in our body is providing energy to cells. If you are an animal, this is pretty much the function of carbohydrates. They're going to be the quick form of energy that your cells are going to use to do just about everything. Your brain cells especially really prefer carbohydrates to just about everything else, and glucose specifically. If you're a plant cell, mushroom cell, any number of protists or bacteria with cell walls, carbohydrates can also provide structural support. Now, glucose or table sugar, these dissolve easily in water, but you can make long polymers of sugar, long chains of sugars, or even complicated nets of sugars, and these can provide a lot of structural stability. Example you're most probably familiar with is going to be cellulose, that is fiber, insoluble fiber in your diet. This is in plant cell walls. This is what holds them together. It's actually a long string of glucoses hooked together in a specific fashion. And we're going to talk more on the next slide about what that specific fashion is. But telephone pole, piece of paper, it's actually made out of glucose. Just glucose that's been modified. And finally, carbohydrates can be involved in signaling. The reason that they can be great for this in cells is that there's a lot of different forms of them. These are only 2 of the possible hexose sugars, glucose and fructose. There's a lot of other ones. And so that huge diversity means that they can be really useful as address labels, essentially. And they're parts of receptors on lots of cells that will kind of say, this is a muscle cell, this is a white blood cell. Lots of different address labels means you can send things lots of different places. So carbohydrates, as they're involved in nutrition, sort of fall into 2 big categories: simple and complex carbohydrates. Simple carbohydrates are your simple sugars. They're monosaccharides or disaccharides. That is, one single sugar or 2 sugars linked together. Simple sugars taste sweet. They're what make, frankly, lots of food really delicious. Table sugar, sucrose, is actually a disaccharide. Glucose and fructose linked together. We'll talk about this a little bit more. Glucose, you've probably heard before if you've cooked using glucose syrup. Fruit sugar, fructose, is another one that people commonly know, but there are lots of others. Complex carbohydrates are so named because they're more complicated. They're lots of sugar molecules linked together in some fashion. Starch is the one that's probably the most relevant for your diet. Starch is chains of glucose which plants make for energy storage, and we're able to digest. So if you have corn that's not particularly sweet, it still has lots of energy because you have glucose in a chain that's been hooked together, which may not taste sweet but does contain plenty of calories for us. Cellulose, again, this is a different chain of glucose. The glucose is hooked together in a different fashion that we're not able to digest. In fact, cows aren't able to digest it. Termites aren't able to digest it. Very few things are able to break apart those individual glucoses and use them as sugar. And it's only really a few different bacteria that are capable of doing that. And many of those bacteria, they're found in the guts of cows and in the guts of termites, where they break down that cellulose for the animal that then absorbs it, kind of piggybacking off of the bacteria's hard work. Almost means that these animals are kind of walking bioreactors. Glycogen is yet another form of glucose polymer, many glucoses hooked together. This is hooked together in yet a third way, different from starch, different from cellulose. We are able to put this together, and we're able to break it back down when we need it. Your liver is an organ that actually has a fair amount of glycogen in it normally when we're healthy, because this will get stored during times when we have plenty to eat, and then when we need it, it'll get broken down quickly and released into our bloodstream so that our blood sugar doesn't crash. If you've ever done any sort of endurance race, despite the fact that you didn't have a huge meal right before that endurance sporting event, whatever it is, it probably took at least a couple of hours before your blood sugar started cratering. That's because your liver was busy breaking up that glycogen that it had already stored previously and dumping it into your bloodstream so that all of your cells could continue doing all the necessary work that they needed to do.